Okay, today we're going to look at the Abyss and Pearl changes. We're going to start off with Abyss, and we're going to look at mid first. And the important thing with this change, this mid change, is that it kind of gives the defenders a bit more room to kind of play mid, because before there used to be very little point in playing mid that much, right? You'd have to commit a lot, like you'd have to commit all the way down to the bottom of mid to kind of defend the area or control the area. You could like take fights, obviously, but like it wasn't really going to give you information or anything. And now it's a lot more in neutral space, so it means that the attackers kind of have to take this area a tiny bit more than they used to, or like they basically need to, really. But now it means they kind of have to take the area a tiny bit. They're going to have to maybe send someone through this angle to then go and take mid. It does kind of give them that kind of route, though. Like, they do have a bit more of a different way into mid in comparison to what they had before. So that you might get surprised by someone on this box or something a bit more in mid if you decide to walk up here as defense. But I think the main thing it does is it gives defense a lot more of a opportunity to kind of be proactive in mid and kind of wall this off with like a Viper or smoke it off or whatever, right? And then go take this space and come behind B and potentially even split the map. And things like splitting the map are quite important for defense, because if you split it like this, right, you're going to get the info on this side. You can kind of play like this and kind of flank all angles. It's kind of important to find these types of splits sometimes on defense in a lot of rounds, and this kind of change does kind of help to do that, or at least gives them another option, gives defense another option to kind of do that. It also means as well as that if there is proactive play in mid, it's going to be harder for the attackers to go straight B, so it kind of give them a bit, it's basically trying to introduce more thought into the way you take the site on B, rather than just I go B and I plant and post plant, and that's kind of it, really. So this gives it a bit more thought in that you can't just run B because there could be a fast flank on you. So it just is further in playing into the changes onto site, which is pretty good. So we'll go into the changes on site. And I think that the viable plant spots are still this position here. I think this position, and this position. So basically all the corners is what I would say is the most viable plant positions. This one also has some merit as well, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. So the main plant, in my opinion, is this one. This is the open plant. It's open to literally everything. So if you can get this plant, it's probably going to be the most valuable one. If you want to get this plant, it's also kind of the same as this one. It's just that it doesn't help any like lurkers you might have in their flank, right? They're not going to be planted for. And also if you plant like this as opposed to this, it might show the enemy that you don't have a flank. So you might lose pressure by planting here a lot. Although maybe you get a surprise round because they don't expect a flank because you planted there. Like there is some mind games to play, but I think for the most part, planting here is really important. And you can plant here if you really need the safe plants, right? Other than that, there is this plant here that kind of gives an angle to the back over here, but it's nowhere near as good as it used to be on the edge of the map. And there's also, I mean, technically there's also this plant on the open part as well, but it's not as good as this one. Albeit this one is kind of unsafe with how open it is, and that one's a lot more safe, so you could go for that, I guess. Or I guess you would plant here actually rather than here. So I don't know why you would ever plant here actually, because this one's just straight up better in every way, and it still provides basically the same safety. So you basically never plant here, you would always plant here. And this, I guess that's kind of the same here, I guess, in some ways. You can plant here, but you can also plant here. This one technically gives you a bit more room to kind of catch up after like all the util has been spanned, where you could kind of see it from here. So I guess you would actually plant here over here. But the main reason why these inner plants could actually be useful is because the main thing it has over the other plants is that this plant and this plant are fairly open, so they can kind of be run away from very easily. So if you want to dump util on a plant, you don't really want to be choosing these ones because they can just run out the util very easily. Unless you know you can bring the clock really low, and you can also like spam them basically very easily, which you can do, to be fair. But if you have an abundance of util that you can use this round, then you could use these because they are a lot more narrow. So then you kind of force the enemy to stay within what you're going to be using on them. Things like Sova ult, like Brim ult, like Tail ult, right? Fade ult even. Things like that, right? You're going to keep them in the area much more easily because they're in a more narrow position. They can't move out of it like they could do with this one, right? They can just run over here and they'll probably be out of the ult or whatever. So these are worth considering to plant in if you have an abundance of post-plant utility. Next, I'll talk about these parts here. And I think opposed to the wooden part here, this one is a lot better because the defender kind of has this position that's a lot more solid in that they can take these fights and not have to worry about being spammed. And at the same time as well, they can't go on top of it, so the defenders have a lot less to worry about. Sorry, the attackers have a lot less to worry about when they actually walk into the site. And they have a lot more to worry about when they actually try and contest the position, which I think is a lot more healthy for this position on Abyss. Next is the dice. I think the dice are actually pretty well like positioned, where they can kind of like on defense, right, so on attack on the post plant, you can kind of take this fight here while being defended by the dice from here, right? And at the same time, so you can take this fight, and then you can kind of choose your timing to go take this fight. And the same thing on this side, right? You can kind of take this fight, and then you can kind of choose your timing to take the Heaven fight. So I think dice is pretty good for the attackers there, and I think for the defenders as well. Once again, kind of same thing. Made out of metal, they can't get spammed at this position. So you have this kind of angle to kind of play off of. This obviously is a bit spammable, to be fair. So maybe there's like some angles here, but I think it's fine. It's fine that it's a bit spammable there. But yeah, I think I like the changes on the Abyss on this site. Next, I want to talk about the last thing I want to talk about on Abyss are the smokes. Obviously, this smoke is like kind of the normal one. You can also tuck it in a bit more, especially against pop flashes. You do want to be tucking it in a lot more like this. So it's like super far back. Another thing you want to do as well is when I see people smoke this, there's like 2 valid smokes that I see. This one is the one I see that I don't think is very valid, right? It's kind of the in-between of the 2 good smokes, in my opinion. So this one is kind of the bad one. I wouldn't do this one. The one that I would do the most is this one. And you want to make sure that you don't leave an edge for someone to stand on here, which is very possible to do. You want to make sure that they can't stand on a ledge and see out of this. And the reason for that is because now they get a tiny bit more space, right? But when they actually come out this smoke, look at how many more angles they're actually exposed to, right? They're exposed to main. If they come out the smoke like this, over here, they're exposed to much less, right? And the important thing with this is that you kind of want to make this kind of trap play with the smoke, right? And you also don't give them like all this walkway to kind of contest the site on as well. So they only have this small area to kind of come out on. So there's less people that can come through the smoke too. So it's going to make it a lot harder for them to kind of orchestrate a flood on you if you put it out like this. Another smoke that I also think could work as well, I haven't tested it as much as the other smokes because it doesn't really come up as often, is that if you do take Heaven in any capacity, right, it would be good to smoke like this because it kind of presents an option, or sorry, a problem for the enemy that they kind of have to like be careful of this smoke. Someone could be in it with a shorty or whatever, right? And on top of that as well, if you have anyone in like an elevated position like this that can see in there, then it means that they can punish the smoke, right? And it's very similar to the one on Bind on B site. But the difference there is that if someone has crossed, it's not going to be the end of the world with this one, right? Because it means that they can't cross and go all the way around to like elbow, right, and flank you on B site. It means that they can just sit here and then come out the B Heaven like normal anyway. Well, it's not necessarily more valuable to do this smoke. It's because then you don't, the cross isn't really that important in comparison to Bind. It can still keep them fairly contained and delay them further, and also potentially even make them use util on this smoke, right? So I would value this smoke quite highly potentially, depending on the situation, right? It's a much more situational smoke than this one on here, right? Okay, so now we'll go on to Pearl. Okay, so these are the Pearl changes, and I think that the Pearl changes aren't as impactful as what they may look like. I think from the defender's perspective, they're a lot different. I think from the attacker's perspective, they're different, but not to a point where you're changing the game plan that much. And I think that the defenders are actually changing some of their post-plant post-plant clearing and that kind of thing a lot more than what the attackers are. The attackers might actually change a bit more of their actual initial clear, but I think the post-plant will kind of stay the same. So the reason why I say that is because this is still going to be the initial plant. So the attackers will actually have this post-plant here. There'll be one person here that can do the close angle. There'll be one person here, which is very, very normal for this anyway, before the actual changes, to kind of play this sort of angle here. And there's also this angle, which you're wondering why I have the Odin, and it's because this is actually spammable. If you actually are more accurate than me and control it. But yeah, this is actually spammable. So it does mean that we might see some 3-manning in main still. More so in pro play, I think in solo queue, we won't see the 3-man in main as much. We might see it because 2 people played this position, potentially. One will swing wide or something. We might see that too. We might see that in pro play as well. It might just still be everyone goes main still, because to me, I don't think the power positions on site are still good enough for the attackers. I still think that the main play is still to play like this. If anything, it might be that the utility changes might have more impact in this way of playing than the actual map changes themselves, but we'll have to see on how that pans out, especially in pro play. So other things we can talk about this with this like default position is that this actually puts a lot of pressure onto this position, because this position has this angle to kind of worry about now as well. So they have a lot more to actually clear, because they're the ones clearing this now, because Heaven can't clear it fully because this box is in the way, and neither can CT, right? There's a massive box in the way. So no one can clear this fully now, aside from this angle here. And on top of that as well, they also have this run out. They have this run out here, so they can actually kill the bomb planter potentially while they're planting. So there's a lot more emphasis on retaking from this position, or at least maybe flooding from this position or contesting from this position is a lot more impactful to kind of hold on to this area for the defenders. This angle I don't see actually doing too much in terms of post plant. I mean, it's fine. It's a good tuck because it means that like this angle is going to happen a lot more. And I think it's quite smart that this angle it kind of goes out this way, because it means that they can take this fight without taking any fights into main. So it is pretty good in terms of like, I think that's kind of the reason why I think it's not going to be as good for the attackers, right? Because they can't actually 2v1 anyone in this angle, right? They can maybe like 2v1 them if they time a swing, right? Like this. But they're never going to actually 2v1 the person in the angle, right? Like this. Because they can't see them. So I think overall it's not actually going to be that impactful for the attackers to play this position. I think it might be a bit of a trap. The other thing I want to talk about as well is that on the flip side, this position is actually pretty good for defenders, because they can get these 1v1s without getting traded very easily, unless they get util dumped by mollies and things. So it just means that this angle is actually quite a powerful one for the defenders, both on attack and defense, so like on post plant and normal play. So I do think that this angle is actually a pretty good addition for the defenders to kind of defend and to also post plant. So I do think it's fine, but I think the problem is that because it's such a powerful position, it does mean that the attackers are going to think, I should probably just play towards main again as a default play. And I think that it shouldn't be the default play to play on main. And to me, I think it's kind of being pushed that way still. Maybe it's like more like it went from 60% to 55% or 50% of the time or something like that. Maybe it was like actually more like 80% to 60% actually thinking about it. But yeah, I think it's kind of like that. Like you'll play main majority of the time, but you will play angles like these bit more than you used to, but you won't play them all the time again. This angle's fine, by the way. This angle's pretty good, actually. You basically always are going to get like a 1-for-1 here, which isn't ideal, but you are going to get like at least a fight that isn't going to be traded by anyone in any other angle other than this one. But this angle is going to be important, more important to defenders, so they're going to stack more people here when they actually go for the retake. So you're going to get traded here, most likely, because there's going to just be more players coming from this position than these two positions, because these two positions got worse than this position. Or at least they got worse because of this position existing. So that's what I think, anyway. I do think as well, sitting back all is still good for the attackers and the defenders. But it's still good for both sides. I do think the attackers have a bit more work to do, as I've already mentioned with this angle here. They have a bit more work to do when actually getting onto site, and there is some like small like parts of that as well, where like when you're clearing this, you actually have to clear this angle too, because now it can be jumpable by anyone, right? Anyone can get on there from heaven. So it is pretty important, like the way you actually attack now on B main. It's not going to be as easy as it used to be. I think this also angle does actually kind of help the attackers though, because there is this angle here. But as soon as you get to this point, you're safe from most angles. There's only going to be like potentially someone peeking here, which is not the realm of possibility, right? Chambers, Yorus, Jets, they'll still exist. So they can still take this angle and run away or TP away or whatever, right? So it is not particularly safe, but it's more safe than it used to be, because something that's very important about this is that if someone were taking a fight here, right? They could easily be another person trading here before, right? But now this trade angle has gone. So you can see like a massive pattern on this site now that they've kind of shown, right? Is that there's going to be a lot of angles that are just strict 1v1s, or they're strict like you have to kind of mix up the way, like you have to mix up the enemy's crosshair to trade. So things like you'll see like 100 Thieves, for instance. They'll do like Asuna, right? He'll jump angles like this to kind of throw off crosshair placement. Though these are the type of angles that are being introduced into Pearl a lot more so than the angles that are more exposed to everything like we saw in the old Pearl. And I'm not sure which one I prefer, to be honest, because I feel like it kind of takes away from teamwork in solo queue specifically. So I like these types of angles that are currently in Pearl, because a lot of people won't play like that simply, right? And they'll play a lot more to do with like these types of trades where they'll play off like someone's contact, for instance. I think it kind of destroys some of the teamwork that you might see in solo queue when the site is kind of like the way it is. But yeah, that's kind of just my thoughts. I do think the site overall is healthier for the game, but it's I think it's a step in the right direction, and it's not fully there yet. But I could be wrong, right? I could be wrong. But that's how I feel right now with the map, with the site itself. So yeah, that's my thoughts. I'd love to know what your thoughts are in the comments below as well. Like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I'll see you in my next one.